This is session number 6 in this little mini-series of the Gospel according to Elihu. 6 is the number of man, right? And the topic today is that the end of man, the end of sin, the ultimate sin, according to Elihu's Gospel and according to Paul's Gospel, and some other things that we'll look at. The ultimate end, where does everything lead? Where does sin lead us to? What is the epitome of the sinful nature? It comes down to sexual perversion. Now you may be like, really? That's where it all leads to? That's where it all leads to. Okay, so let's start with Elihu's message to Job here. But the hypocrites in heart store up wrath. In other words, they store up judgment because they say the right things but do the wrong things. They do not cry for help when he binds them. When they go into bondage, they don't respond by crying out to God for help. It says they die in youth. What that means is they become zombies. It says in the Hebrew that their soul dies in them while they are young. So the body's still alive, but the soul becomes dead. It becomes full of darkness and death. And their life ends among the perverted persons. And let me just read what it says in the Hebrew version of my Bible. It says, those practicing sodomy or prostitution in religious rituals. Okay, so that was Elihu's reference, was that people that do not respond to the love and the call of God become worse and worse, and where they end up, where they die, that soul dies within them, is in sexual perversion. And Paul shows us the same thing in Romans chapter 1 and verse 22. Well, let's look at the whole process here, because Paul is talking about God being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men in verse 18 of chapter 1, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Okay, so there's the hypocrites again. And what is known of God is manifest to them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. In other words, anybody can look at this world and know what's right and what's wrong and have to make a choice between it as to how they respond to God and his goodness. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. You know, they didn't recognize him. They refused to recognize him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile or useless in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Okay, that's what Elihu said. Their soul dies within them. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made with like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and all kinds of idols and that kind of stuff. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. And Paul explains it very explicitly, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, or rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. And I'm saying that this is the end of man. This is where it all ends. This is where all sin and debauchery and disobedience to God points to. This is where it leads every man and woman to. And so God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. The men also, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lusts to one another, men committing with men the shameful thing and receiving in themselves the penalty for their error. Being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness. Let's just list them off. Full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning. In other words, they fall for a lie rather than the truth. The truth doesn't make sense to them. Untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do they do the same, but also approve of those who practice those same things. So you see, this slippery slope of sin ends up in sexual perversion. Yep, that's where it goes. That's where it all ends. And that's where every society has ended. You can look back through history, and when a society or a culture finally falls, it falls in the time when they become aware that sexual perversion is a good thing. And then Paul says, not only do they do the same, but they become the ones who approve or disapprove. So this is it. When a government or a group puts a stamp and even an agenda onto homosexuality, onto transitioning, your gender, all of those kind of things, that is the end of the road. And that's them not only doing those things, but approving the other people that do them. In other words, to fit into that society, you're going to have that approval. And it's more and more like that all the time. And so you can see right from Elihu all the way through to Paul, this is the process of the sin nature of man. It will end up in sexual perversion. And that sexual perversion puts a demand on everybody, on you and I, on everyone, that we accept it, that we approve of it, and that we actually celebrate it. So the gospel according to Elihu and the Apostle Paul, when the sinful nature of man fully embraces sexual perversion, allows it, promotes it, celebrates it, that is the last step before the fall of that culture or that government or that nature. Watch and see.